In the vast, uncharted regions of the galaxy, whispers spread from one star system to another about an entity so terrifying that even the war-hardened empires dare not speak its name aloud. They are known only as the Eclipsed. Entire civilizations have vanished without a trace in their wake. Now a crew of reckless explorers, driven by curiosity and the promise of untold riches, dares to seek out the truth behind the legend. What they uncover will haunt them forever. The vastness of space stretched infinitely in all directions, a canvas of darkness sprinkled with distant stars. Aboard the massive starship known as Oblivion's Edge, Captain Elias Cade stood at the command deck, his gaze fixed on the holographic display before him. The ship's sensors had picked up an encrypted transmission from an abandoned research outpost orbiting the desolate world of Sci-Fi 7. The message was fragmented and distorted, but one phrase remained unmistakably clear: "Do not seek them, do not let them see you." A cold silence filled the bridge as the crew processed the cryptic warning. Dr. Celine Voss, the ship's navigator and scientist, frowned as she analyzed the data. Her sharp, analytical mind told her that something was deeply wrong. The research station had been abandoned for over a decade, yet this distress signal had been transmitted only a few hours ago. Doran Hask, the ship's weapons specialist, crossed his arms and shook his head. "I do not like this," he muttered. "A dead station suddenly comes back to life, warning us to stay away? This is a trap." Captain Cade, however, was not so easily swayed. He was a man driven by curiosity and ambition. The unknown called to him like a siren's song, and he had spent his entire life chasing mysteries hidden within the galaxy's endless expanse. He turned to the crew and spoke with conviction. "This could be the discovery of a lifetime. If we ignore it, we may never know what happened here. We are explorers, and it is our duty to uncover the truth." Celine hesitated, her fingers tapping against the console. "Captain, this message is not just a warning. It is a plea. Someone was terrified when they sent this. We should consider the possibility that whatever happened on Sci-Fi 7 is beyond our understanding." Despite her caution, Cade's decision was final. "We proceed with caution, but we proceed nonetheless," he said firmly. "Set course for Sci-Fi 7. The engines of Oblivion's Edge roared to life, propelling the ship toward the desolate planet. As they approached, the research station came into view, a massive floating structure orbiting the lifeless world below. It was dark, silent, and eerily intact. There were no visible signs of damage, no escape pods launched, and no signals other than the eerie distress call. The crew prepared for boarding. Armed with scanning equipment and protective gear, they stepped onto the station's cold metallic surface. The air was stale, carrying the scent of something ancient and undisturbed. Dim emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows across the empty corridors. Then they saw it. Strange markings covered the walls, deep carvings etched into the metal. The symbols were unfamiliar, pulsating with a faint, unnatural glow. Celine reached out to touch one, but the moment her fingers brushed against it, a whisper filled the air. It was distant, unintelligible, yet filled with urgency. They had come seeking answers, but something was waiting for them. The research station was eerily silent, its dim emergency lights flickering intermittently. The crew moved cautiously through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. Captain Elias Cade led the way, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. Behind him, Dr. Celine Voss carried her data scanner, her mind racing to process the strange symbols carved into the walls. "These markings are unlike anything I have ever seen," Celine murmured, running her fingers gently over the etched lines. "They are pulsating with an unknown energy." Doran Hask, the weapons specialist, kept his pulse rifle ready, his instincts on high alert. "I do not like this place," he muttered. "Something is wrong here. It feels alive." The deeper they ventured, the colder the air became. A strange mist clung to the floor, swirling around their boots like a living entity. The crew's breathing became heavier, as if the air itself resisted their presence. Suddenly, the ship's engineer, Marcus Reed, stopped in his tracks. His expression twisted into one of confusion as he pointed ahead. "There is a door." "But it was not there a moment ago," he whispered. The crew turned to face the massive, blackened doorway embedded in the metallic wall. It had no visible seams, no controls, yet it hummed with an otherworldly energy. As they stepped closer, the carvings along the walls seemed to shift, rearranging themselves as if responding to their presence. Celine's scanner beeped rapidly. This structure is ancient, possibly older than any known civilization. The readings suggest that something lies beyond this door, something powerful. Captain Cade placed his hand on the cold surface, and with a deep, mechanical groan, the doorway slid open. A wave of icy air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of something old and undisturbed. Beyond the threshold, an enormous chamber stretched into darkness, its walls lined with towering crystalline pods. Each pod contained a figure, humanoid in shape but featureless, their bodies shifting like smoke trapped in glass. Doran gripped his rifle tighter. "Are they alive?" Celine's voice wavered. "They are in a quantum state, neither fully present nor absent. If we interact with them, we may trigger something beyond our control." As if responding to her words, a low vibration filled the chamber. The pods began to hum, their surfaces rippling as though awakening from a long slumber. The crew instinctively stepped back, their hearts pounding. Then, with an ear-splitting crack, one of the pods shattered. A formless shadow spilled out, twisting and expanding. As it moved, it took shape, its body elongating, its limbs stretching unnaturally. It had no face, no eyes, yet the crew could feel it watching them. The air grew heavy with an unspoken dread. Captain Cade took a step back and whispered, "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The nightmare had already begun. The chamber was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant hum of the research station's failing power systems. The crew stood frozen, their eyes locked on the shattered pod. A dark, shifting form had emerged from within, twisting and stretching as if adjusting to its newfound existence. It had no fixed shape, its body constantly shifting like liquid smoke. Though it had no discernible eyes, the crew could feel an unseen force staring directly at them. Captain Elias Cade slowly stepped backward, his instincts screaming for him to retreat. His hand hovered over his communicator, ready to call for an emergency evacuation. Dr. Celine Voss clutched her data scanner, her mind racing to make sense of what she was witnessing. The readings were unlike anything she had ever encountered. The entity existed in multiple states at once, fluctuating between dimensions, its presence barely anchored to reality. Doran Hask, gripping his pulse rifle, took a cautious step forward. His voice was low and steady. "We need to leave immediately. This thing is waking up the others." As if responding to his words, a deep, resonant vibration pulsed through the chamber. The remaining crystalline pods began to tremble, their smooth surfaces cracking as dark figures stirred within. One by one, the beings began to emerge, their shifting forms moving unnaturally through the dim light. Marcus Reed, the ship's engineer, swallowed hard. "We have to go, now." Captain Cade turned toward the exit, his voice firm. "Back to the ship. Move." The crew broke into a sprint, their footsteps echoing through the vast chamber. The shadows behind them stretched and twisted, moving faster than should have been possible. A strange whispering sound filled the air, like thousands of voices speaking at once, yet none in a language they could understand. As they reached the corridor leading back to the docking bay, the station's lights flickered violently. The walls seemed to shift, elongating and narrowing as if the station itself was changing shape. Celine stumbled, feeling an invisible force pulling at her mind, whispering thoughts that were not her own. Doran grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Stay focused, keep moving," he shouted. The air grew thick with a suffocating pressure. The crew could feel something pressing against their thoughts, invading their senses. A deep sense of dread filled them, an overwhelming fear that threatened to consume their will to escape. Captain Cade forced himself to push forward. They were almost at the airlock. He could see the docking bay ahead, the familiar silhouette of their ship waiting like a beacon of hope. But just as they neared the entrance, the whispers stopped. Silence. Then, a voice, low and distorted, echoed through the corridor. "You have seen us, now we are real." The lights went out, and the hunt began. Darkness swallowed the corridor as the station's lights flickered and died. The air was thick with silence, an unnatural stillness that sent shivers through the crew. Captain Elias Cade tightened his grip on his weapon, his heart pounding like a war drum. The only sound was the rhythmic breathing of his team as they stood frozen, listening for any sign of movement. Then, the whispering returned. It came from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding them like a living presence. The voices overlapped, some distant, some unnervingly close. They spoke in an unknown language, yet their meaning was disturbingly clear. They were not just words. They were thoughts, emotions, echoes of something beyond human comprehension. Dr. Celine Voss pressed her hands against her ears, her face twisted in pain. "They are inside our minds," she gasped. "They are not speaking, they are remembering us." Doran Hask took a step backward, his pulse rifle raised. "We have to move now. If we stand here, we are as good as dead." Captain Cade nodded sharply. "Run, get to the ship." The crew broke into a desperate sprint, their boots pounding against the metal floor. The air behind them warped, shadows twisting unnaturally, reaching out like hungry tendrils. The station itself seemed to shift, the walls elongating, the corridors stretching as if trying to trap them within its labyrinth. As they turned a corner, Marcus Reed let out a strangled cry. The crew spun around just in time to see him freeze in place. His body was rigid, his eyes wide with terror. A figure stood before him, an exact replica of himself, but wrong. Its eyes were deep, empty voids, and its expression was stretched into an unnatural hollow grin. The figure raised a hand. Marcus mirrored the motion unwillingly, his limbs no longer under his own control. A silent scream formed on his lips, but no sound escaped. Celine reached for him, but Doran grabbed her wrist and pulled her away. "He is gone. We cannot save him." The ship was just ahead. The airlock doors stood open, the promise of escape within reach. But as they ran, the shadows moved faster. Figures emerged from the darkness, distorted, shifting shapes that mirrored the crew's own forms. Each of them had a duplicate, staring back with empty, soulless eyes. Captain Cade reached the control panel and slammed his hand against the override button. The airlock doors slid shut just as the creatures reached the threshold. For a brief moment, the whispering voices turned into a piercing screech, a sound of frustration and hunger. Then, silence. The crew collapsed onto the floor of their ship, gasping for breath. The Oblivion's edge detached from the station, its engines roaring to life. As they drifted into space, Celine turned to the ship's systems, running a final scan. "The station is silent again," she said softly. "We made it." But Captain Cade did not answer. He was staring at the ship's reflection in the cockpit glass. The crew was inside the ship, and so were their shadows. No one speaks of the eclipsed anymore. But across the galaxy, in the darkest corners of space, there are whispers. Of ships vanishing without a trace, of shadows that stretch where no light falls, and of creatures that become real the moment you see them.